Next, we're going to delve into the Carlhian and Duveen archives with Teresa Morales, who is an independent scholar and freelance provenance researcher and art consultant. Sorry, I don't want to lower the mic too low for you. You'll have to put it back up again. Morales holds a BA in art history from the University of California, Los Angeles, an MA in art from California State University, Northridge, and a recent PhD in art education from Pennsylvania State University. Morales is currently collaborating on an exhibition at the J. Paul Getty Museum based on her doctoral research, which relates to the exhibition development and interpretive processes of an 18th century French domestic interior in the museum's collection. As a senior collections cataloger in special collections at the Getty Research Institute, she was responsible for processing, organizing, and arranging materials in collections spanning the 16th to 20th centuries, most notably records from their dealers Carlhian and Duveen brothers. While at the GRI, Morales also curated a display of archival items pertaining to a paneled room at the Getty and gave presentations on select archival collections. Please join me in welcoming Teresa Morales.
I first came across these collections nearly 2 decades ago when I worked at the Getty Center for the History of Art and the Humanities, and I use them still today for freelance provenance research. The Carlhian and Duveen archives have proved to be compelling primary sources for gathering historical evidence of French paneled rooms in America. From the Legion of Honor and the Getty Museum to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Philadelphia Museum of Art, these 2 archives have influenced the installation and interpretation of museum period and paneled rooms nationwide. What is astonishing is that they are both in the same repository. My objective here today is to sketch 3 areas for you. First, I will describe each archive, then give a brief case study of the Getty Museum's Régence Room in order to demonstrate archival evidence. And in closing, I will summarize my distinction between museum period and paneled rooms. The Carlhian and Duveen archives at the Getty Research Institute, known casually as the GRI, allow us to look at the past for explanation and understanding. Their value to scholarly research lies in the history of taste, of the art trade, of art collecting and movement of artworks. Navigating these archives can be tricky, though, not just because of the vast quantity of papers and photographs, stock books and ledgers, and architectural drawings and plans, but also due to the eccentric naming and filing conventions. Of great assistance are finding aids, which give scholars an outline of an archive's contents and help to maneuver through masses of data. Overall, items in each of these collections are fragile. In the case of the Duveen records, it's because the company's widespread use of paper that was made with acidic wood pulp resulted in brittleness. And in the Carlhian, many of the items are just worn out from consistent decades-long use, such as with their stock books and drawings. Materials in each have been cleaned of grime, objects afflicted with red rot have been protected, and mold, where present, was removed. Because of their fragility, access to the Duveen brothers' records in particular is restricted to microfilm, and use of physical materials for it and the collection of stock photographs is evaluated on a case-by-case situation. In the context of these 2 collections, the bulk of archival data about paneled rooms comes from the Carlhian archive, which Robert Carlhian sold to the GRI in 1993. These records preserve the business affairs of the Paris-based family-operated firm of interior decorators and decorative arts dealers from its offices in Paris, London, New York, and Buenos Aires. The materials date from 1867 to 1988 and comprise correspondence, stock books, ledgers, 14,000 photographs, architectural plans and drawings, furniture designs, and fabric samples. These items are stored in acid-free containers that span 1,332 linear feet, contained in 837 boxes, 627 flat file folders, and 86 rolls. André Carlhian, from the company's second generation, is credited with establishing a trade in architectural salvage from chateaux and hotels. Acquiring, adapting, and selling boiserie or paneling became a specialty for the firm. Along with other architectural elements such as mirrors, doors, windows, ceiling medallions, cornices, and parquet floors, Carlhian had the capacity to recreate 18th century French interiors for 19th and 20th century clients. Archival records indicate that by the mid-1920s, the Carlhian firm had nearly 40 boiseries in stock, all taken from various locations around France. This table of boiserie stock indicates the earliest acquisition in 1913, with the pace quickening in 1925. Among their roster of clients for French paneled rooms were Fulgencia Batista, Emperor Baudai, Maharaja of Baroda, J. Paul Getty, Dr. and Mrs. Hamilton Rice, as well as various banks and embassies. The Duveen Brothers Company, art dealers with branches in London, Paris, and New York, was also active from the mid-19th to the late 20th century. It specialized in Delft ware, Chinese porcelain, tapestries, furniture, and old masters' paintings. At its peak, Duveen Brothers was a powerful force in the American art market under the guidance of Joseph Duveen, who was assisted by art experts such as Bernard Berenson, Wilhelm von Bode, and Max Friedlander. In 1996, the Metropolitan Museum of Art donated the bulk of the Duveen Brothers' business records to the GRI. These records had been bequeathed to the Met in 1968 by Edward Fowles, who had in 1939 purchased the company with two partners. The collection contains extensive correspondence, stock books, sales books, invoices, nearly 2,000 negatives, about 100 x-rays of paintings, and more than 1,000 photographs. More recently, in 2006, the Duveen Brothers' stock photographs and records were deposited at the GRI by the Sterling and Francine Clark Art Institute in Massachusetts. In 1969, the Clark had acquired the Duveen Brothers Library, along with the firm's remaining archive. The materials in this group include scrapbooks, photographs of stock, architectural plans, and art expertise documentation. The GRI completed processing, cataloging, conservation, and microfilming of the collection in 2012. Combined, these Duveen records span 1,149 linear feet in 1,329 boxes, 28 flat file folders, and 2 rolls. I used the correspondence to search for communications each company had with business associates and clients. In the stock books and ledgers, I can explore their inventories, payments, and expenditures. The photographs, plans, drawings, and fabric samples supply additional scope of business operations with their visual representations of the company's numerous projects. The Carlhian firm and Duveen Brothers collaborated extensively beginning in the 1900s. In fact, in 1908, a private telephone line was installed between the two offices. On October 15, 1919, André Carlhian wrote a letter to Duveen, which included a secret business agreement that they were about to make, and which was revised several years later. Point number 5 made it very clear that, quote, Carlhian and Company have full liberty as regards the purchasing and selling of old paneled rooms, over mantels, chimney pieces, frames, and other decorative objects used in the decoration of a room, unquote. Together, Carlhian and Duveen produced sumptuous interiors for numerous private residences in America and Europe, integrating historical furnishings with old master paintings and sculpture, newly woven textiles, and reproductions of various sorts. They helped many wealthy American industrialists achieve their desire for the trappings of a cultured lifestyle. The Getty Museum's Regenced paneled room might have been one such room. This brief case study will show just how these archives function as a key to French paneled rooms in America. I'm going to begin with some very broad strokes to establish the room's historical context. In Paris in 1725, 2 years after the close of the Régence period of Philippe II, panels were installed in the bedroom of a new French mansion at 18 Place Vendôme, the city's financial center, overlooking the fashionable square of residences commissioned by Louis XIV. This map from the Carlhian Archive indicates the large square there on the left, and here this large expanse on the right, the Jardin des Tuileries. At the time, houses in this square were considered modern. Number 18 was one of 28 parcels, a smaller L-shaped plot situated along the northeastern range of the square. The square, conceived in 1685 by the king, was to have been a physical manifestation of the power housing his royal academies, including the Royal Library, the Mint, and residences for visiting VIPs. However, a few years after the project started, the king redirected the monies to the wars being fought in Europe and colonial America. In 1698, the project was taken over by 4 venture capitalists, among whom was Nicolas Herlot, the first owner and resident of 18 Place Vendôme. Now, here's a broad stroke. Fast forward to Paris in the 1920s. André Carlhian had survived military service in World War I, unlike his brother Paul, who was killed in action. André went on to run the business alone, managing about 30 craftsmen and office staff. He was very effective in the operations of developing the company into a respected decorating firm, which also bought, sold, and reproduced furnishings. At the same time, Duveen Brothers was at the height of its position in the world of fine arts. Joseph Duveen, recognized for creating art collections for his clients, convinced many of them to reflect his taste in 18th century French interior decoration as a setting for the art objects he sold them. A short list of American clients that the companies shared includes Frick and Getty, Gould and Huntington, Kress and Widener. Now, the Carlhian kept impressive documentation of its boiserie. This photograph of Carlhian's warehouse illustrates a bird's eye view of stacks of boiserie and carved architectural models hanging from walls and railings, which reminds me of the image from Fayot that Dr. Laban showed us earlier. And this next photograph, it shows another installation of other evidently finer boiserie. Inventories and photo documentation of the panels can be found in various sections of the archives, but one in particular is this binder. Inside, there are 2 pages and 4 photographs associated with the Régence panels, which note the provenance as Hôtel Herlot. A detailed inventory tracks restoration performed on the panels beginning in 1932, the year Carlhian bought and removed them from the Westminster Foreign Bank, then at 18 Place Vendôme. The restoration concluded in 1938. The charges for removal, transporting, and restoring the architectural elements were noted meticulously. Additional materials in the archive, such as accounting records and stock books, such as this with the mignonette photographs, the bottom section indicates here entry for the Régence panels, now in the Getty's collection. There's also correspondence and drawings you see here illustrating the Régence panels, and a maquette that demonstrates the firm's methods for storing and efforts towards selling the Régence panels, a medallion of which you can see here. Sometimes in the 1930s, Carlhian had a maquette made showing the panels combined with a room, including a tapestry. A photograph ledger entry indicates that Carlhian and Duveen were trying to sell the room to an esteemed client, Mrs. Hamilton Rice, in which to frame her Gobelin tapestries. This photograph shows the maquette along with a paper doll in elegant dress, and on the back the back wall is an illustration of her tapestry from the Don Quixote series. And this slide from the GRI's photo study collection gives you a closer look at the Gobelin tapestries, the 2 scenes with the Duchess. Based on archival records, a maquette was not included in the 1939 shipment of panels from Paris to Duveen's New York office. But according to this Carlhian order book shown here, the center section suggests that the maquette was sent in 1947, and it was painted with watercolors. There. This elevation illustrates a different Gobelin tapestry, Aurora and Cephalus from Boucher's Les Tentures series. And I want to thank Charissa Bremer-David for her help with identifying these tapestries. Shortly after World War II, Duveen Brothers director Edward Fowles and André Carlhian exchanged several letters and telegrams discussing the Régence panels, specifically its installation in one of Duveen's 5 showrooms. Here you see it. The two men also discussed the business market for boiserie and how it had transferred from individuals to museums. What happened is that during and after the war, private collectors' interests in acquiring French boiserie began to wane. Yet in 1950, after the panels were installed in the showroom, Mr. Getty supposedly saw them there, as this letter from Edward Fowles to André Carlhian suggests. In it, Fowles tells Carlhian to expect a visit from Getty, quote, a very wealthy oil man of California. Fowles goes on to explain that Getty wants a modern boiserie in which to place his tapestries, but Fowles recommended that Getty buy an old boiserie and showed him the Place Vendôme, which Getty liked. Fowles offered additional background, stating that, quote, Getty speaks French fluently. He's a hard bargainer, and the man is very serious and can become a good client, unquote. A few years after that encounter, the panels went into storage when Duveen Brothers moved its offices from Fifth Avenue to 79th Street. The panels stayed in storage until Duveen Brothers went out of business in 1964, at which time the company sold all of its stock to Norton Simon. Mr. Simon, in turn, sold off much of that inventory, which had included sculpture, ceramics, tapestries, furniture, paintings, and a 15,000-volume library, which ended up at the Clark. He even sold Duveen's building on 79th Street. The Régence panels, however, wound up in French & Company's stock, another dealer from whom the Getty Museum purchased them in 1971. The particulars of how French & Company got the panels and how they caught the attention of the Getty Museum are vague. This is where, as a detective might say, the case grows cold. The archives do not contain any evidence, and stabs at oral histories have been unsuccessful in filling the gaps of information, which is understandable given the 43 years that have passed since the museum acquired the panels. These archives provide photographs of 2 different installations of the Régence panels. Here, Carlhian's from the late 1930s. And again, this, the version 1950s, the Duveen showroom. Recent information about the room makes the following contributions. The Getty Museum in Malibu first installed the Régence room in the mid-1970s in its decorative arts galleries, as you can see here with Boucher tapestries. Then in the mid-1990s, the panels were deinstalled. After extensive research performed by conservators Brian Considine and Joe Godla in the Carlhian Archive, which at that time had just arrived at the GRI, the room was reinstalled at the Getty Museum in Brentwood, following original dimensions and configuration. Craftsmanship of the carved oak and walnut panels is attributed to the ornament sculptor Charles-Louis Morisson and the furniture worker Jacques Gauthier, after designs by the architect Armand Clamollet. I may be corrected here by Charissa and Brian, who are in the audience, but by my count, it is 16 of the gilt panels and molding that have survived. In contrast, the other plain white panels are modern replacements, which mark where long-lost original gilt panels would have been. In addition to the panels, the room includes 2 windows, 2 doors, 3 mirrors, and a chimney piece. The 2 windows would have overlooked the square, and the doors would have led to other rooms in the house. Next, I'm going to shift to a summarization of the differences what I see to be differences between museum period and paneled rooms, which are found all across America from large urban centers to small rural towns. The distinction I make between these two forms of museum display is linked to changing philosophies. Generally speaking, period rooms found in both homes and museums are associated with decorative purposes. As representations of the past, period rooms offer atmosphere, suggesting a snapshot in time. Paneling in these spaces functions as a kind of anonymous theatrical backdrop to contain the action created by the objects displayed within them. However, over time, the greater recognition of architectural elements as museum art objects in their own right, along with a motive for historical accuracy, has led to the use of the term paneled rooms. Even so, all period and period paneled rooms, period room installations, face the issue of dismantling. It may be that not all go through full reconsideration and reinterpretation. This could be a reflection of the integrity of the original installation and/or the possibility of other installation options, rather than by the sophistication of the institution. Nevertheless, in the past 25 years, 4 well-known museums have scrutinized their rooms: the Getty Museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, and the Museum of Fine Arts Boston. They, and now the Legion of Honor, represent a transformation in the primacy of display. Today, the room is the larger object. It determines the furnishings, whereas before the philosophical approach to display changed, decorative arts objects were separate aesthetic pieces demanding vaguely appropriate period settings, like, let's say, at the cloisters in New York. These recent, more holistic trends in art history toward reinstallations and reinterpretations of period and paneled rooms have generated new symposia, such as this one, along with new publications. What they signify is an ongoing concern by historians and conservators for period and paneled room display and interpretation. The whole process has raised new questions not previously considered. Why? Well, to me, partly because museums are inviting visitors to observe the skill and labor involved with conservation, actually taking place in the galleries, which creates a type of art performance to capture public attention. This pedagogical approach makes it much more obvious to visitors when a period or paneled room changes. Another aspect is that changing these rooms is quite expensive to produce since the object is so large, and it is the expense of the process that limits the frequency with which they can be reinterpreted and reinstalled. Questions about objects, how they are accessioned and documented, have changed too. There was a time when panels were purchased and installed simply as part of the decoration, without consideration of accessioning them as art objects. But such practices have been replaced by comprehensive research among curators and conservators who collaborate to preserve decorative arts objects and display them with historical accuracy. Certainly, museum workers have begun to think twice before drilling holes into panels to hang paintings. To conclude, I want to say simply that the Carlhian and Duveen archives at the Getty Research Institute offer both written and visual documentation that should be studied together by anyone searching for answers to questions about the who, what, where, when, and why of French paneled rooms. These collections give a fairly complete picture of boiserie acquisitions and inventories, details about provenance, removal and storage, descriptions and visual illustrations, adaptations of architectural elements, and sales attempts. Moreover, in looking through the keyhole of these two archives, the viewer will be exposed to the legacy of André Carlhian and Joseph Duveen, namely an astounding amalgamation of their creativity, cunning, cajolery, and skill, which imagined French paneled rooms in America. Thank you.